We are coming for our children. The signal came in at 3:42 in the morning station time. Nobody was supposed to be listening that deep into the outer band frequencies. The monitoring equipment at Relay Post 9 was old, held together with replacement parts and the stubbornness of the two-person crew stationed there. But the antenna had drifted during a routine recalibration, and instead of scanning the approved diplomatic channels, it caught something else entirely. A voice, small, tired. The junior operator, a young man named Danny, sat up straight in his chair when the translation filter flagged it. He ran it twice, then a third time. The voice was speaking a broken mix, part old coastal Swahili, part something the system did not recognize at all. The filter stitched what it could together and left the rest as gaps. We are human. We work here. We are not free. Danny did not move for a long moment. Then he picked up the emergency lines. By morning, Commander Lena Addisa had listened to the recording 11 times. She was not a person who showed much on her face. 30 years of fleet service had worn that habit away. But the people around her that morning noticed something different. Her stillness was not the usual kind. It was the kind that came before something irreversible. She forwarded the full recording to Director Ralph Magnuson at the Galactic Relations Office without any message attached. He called her within 4 minutes. "Tell me this is a mistake." The voice pattern analysis puts the Swahili dialect at 3 to 4 generations removed from the East African coastal family, she said. Probably descended from the Mombasa colony fleet that went dark in 2271. The alien language layered into it matches no known diplomatic species, but the registration code embedded in the signal carrier does. It belongs to a cargo freighter under the Drun Collective. There was silence on the line. How old, Magnuson said. It was not a question about the recording. He already understood what she was telling him. Voice pattern analysis estimates 8 to 12 years old. The Drun Collective was not a species anyone on Earth paid particular attention to. Mid-tier in the galactic commercial hierarchy, traders, logistics brokers, moving goods between larger powers who didn't want to deal with one another directly. They held a seat in the outer ring of the Galactic Council. They paid their tariffs. They sent delegates to summits. Unremarkable in every way that mattered, and remarkable in no way anyone had ever looked closely enough to find. That changed within hours. Earth's intelligence division did not need to hack anything. The Drun filed meticulous records. Every transaction, every cargo manifest, every labor contract, all of it sat in the Galactic Commercial Registry, technically a public archive. Nobody had ever read through it with the specific question Earth's analysts were now asking. The first result came back in under 2 hours, then the next, then 40 more. By the time Addisa was called into the emergency briefing at Fleet Command, the number stood at 411 individual entries, each one filed under a legal category that translated roughly as unclaimed biological asset acquired from depopulated territory. Each entry carried physical descriptors: height, approximate age at acquisition, skill assessments. Each one carried a transaction record showing where the asset had been sent. They were children, human children taken during colony collapses, the kind that happened in the chaotic early centuries of expansion, when ships went dark and settlements failed and Earth was too far away and too underfunded to respond in time. Children left behind, separated, or simply present when Drun ships arrived. The Drun had not hidden them. They had simply categorized them under a legal framework no human had ever thought to challenge, because no human had ever known to look. Magnuson stood at the front of the briefing room and read the numbers without expression. 4,063 confirmed entries, 11 separate star systems. The oldest acquisition logged was 61 years ago. Someone in the back of the room made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Addisa said nothing. She was looking at the star map on the wall, tracing routes in her head. She knew these lanes. She had spent years learning them. Magnuson pulled up the Galactic Council communication he'd received that morning, a preemptive message, which meant someone inside the council had already been informed and had moved quickly to get ahead of it. The message was polite. It used phrases like procedural complexity and historical jurisdictional ambiguity and recommended timeline for diplomatic review. How long do they want? Adisa asked. 18 months for a preliminary review panel. The room was very quiet. I would like to recommend, Adisa said in the same tone she used to request fuel reports, that we do not wait 18 months. Magnuson looked at her for a long time. He was a careful man. He had spent his career finding the language that kept Earth out of wars it could not afford, finding the compromises that kept the galactic lanes open. He believed in process. He believed in patience. He looked at the star map. He looked at the number on the screen. I'll put the fleet authorization request through tonight, he said. Adisa nodded once, picked up her jacket, and walked out of the room. There was a lot of work to do, and she had already decided how it was going to go. She just needed the ships. The Drun did not believe Earth would actually come. This was not arrogance exactly. It was a reasonable conclusion based on how the galaxy worked. In 400 years of interstellar diplomacy, no species had ever sent a military vessel into another's registered commercial space over a labor dispute. There were processes for that. Panels, review boards, long chains of correspondence that typically ended in a settlement fund, and a joint statement expressing mutual respect for all parties. So when Earth filed no formal complaint, sent no envoy, and requested no emergency council session, the Drun's legal team assumed the matter was being handled quietly, the way most things were. They drafted a preemptive compensation offer, modest, carefully worded to admit no wrongdoing, and sent it through standard channels. It was never answered. What Earth sent instead was a single vessel. The UEF Ndugu, not a warship by classification, listed as a diplomatic transport, which was technically accurate. It carried a diplomatic team. It also carried 40 armed UEF officers in unmarked gear, 3 forensic archivists, 2 medical teams, and Admiral Adisa, who sat in the forward observation room and watched the Drun labor station grow larger through the viewport without saying a single word. The station, registered as Procurement Hub 17, orbited a dim, cold gas giant in a system with no other inhabitants. From the outside, it looked like any mid-sized commercial depot, docking rings, cargo bays, processing corridors. The Drun had not hidden it. Why would they? It was all perfectly legal. Every child inside it had a registration number, a contract number, an acquisition record. The paperwork was immaculate. Adisa led the boarding team herself. The station master, a Drun official named Hall, met them at the airlock with 3 lawyers and a data pad already open to the relevant legal codes. He was calm, speaking slowly, as if addressing people who might not understand how things worked. Under Galactic Commercial Code, Section 44, Subsection 9, he began, the classification of unclaimed biological assets acquired from depopulated colonial territories is fully recognized and protected under. Where are they? Adisa said. Hall paused. I am explaining the legal framework that governs. I heard you. Where are the children's? The medical team found them in the lower processing level, 41 of them in that station alone, ranging from an estimated 6 years old to perhaps 16, wearing identical gray work clothes with station identification numbers on the left sleeve. Some spoke no Earth language at all. Some spoke a pidgin half-human, half-Drun trade tongue. A few didn't react when the medical team entered, just kept their eyes down, the way people do when they've learned that reacting to strangers isn't safe. One boy looked up. Small for his age, the medical team later recorded approximately 9 years. His name, he said in careful, accented Swahili, was Soren. He said it like he'd been practicing it in his head for a long time, keeping it somewhere the work schedules and station routines couldn't reach. Adisa crouched in front of him and asked if he knew where he was from. He said a word she didn't recognize at first. Then she realized it was a ship name, the colony vessel his family had been on generations back before it went dark. He'd learned it from an older child who'd learned it from someone older still. A name passed down through years of labor like a prayer. She stood, walked back to Hall, and said, "You're under arrest." On what authorities? His lawyers began speaking at once. She didn't listen. The UAF officers stepped forward, and that ended the conversation. The Drun Collective's formal complaint reached the Galactic Council within 6 hours, thorough, well-documented, citing 47 separate legal codes. The Council sent an urgent message to Magnuson expressing serious concern about unilateral action and the dangerous precedent being set. Magnuson read it. Then he looked at the feed coming in from the medical teams, children being examined, given food, sitting in the Ndugu's corridors wrapped in blankets, some sleeping for the first time in a long time without having to be anywhere in the morning. He typed Earth's official response to the Council himself. One sentence, "We are coming for our children." Well, he sent then he authorized the second wave, 40 UAF ships already waiting at the edge of the system, which moved forward the moment the order cleared. The Council sent another message. Magnuson didn't read it that night. He watched the fleet move on the monitor instead, 40 drive signatures lighting up the dark, and thought about a word he hadn't used in a professional context in 30 years. Justice, an old word, an Earth word. Most of the galaxy preferred terms like resolution and remediation and mutually agreed settlement framework. Magnuson had always found those words useful. He didn't find them useful anymore. The galaxy had a way of watching without getting involved, a phrase an Orani trade diplomat had once used in a closed session, and it had spread quietly through the back corridors of interstellar politics ever since. Species watched each other. They sent observers, they filed reports, they expressed concern through the appropriate channels. But getting involved truly physically with ships in space and officers on station floors, that was a different thing entirely. Expensive, destabilizing. The kind of action that disrupted trade lanes and upset the careful arrangements that kept everyone comfortable. Earth had disrupted several of those arrangements in the past 2 weeks. The 40 UEF ships had reached the outer Drun systems and begun a methodical station-by-station process the Drun's lawyers were calling an illegal occupation, and Earth's fleet was calling a child recovery operation. The distinction mattered to both sides for very different reasons. Word spread the way it always did in the outer systems, through freight crews and dock workers, and the informal information networks that moved faster than any official channel. And the galaxy, which had been watching, began to sort itself. The first to send a message to Earth were not the powerful ones. A small species called the Virani, amphibious, quiet, known mostly for their mapping work in uncharted sectors, transmitted a short encrypted file to UEF command. Inside it were 14 coordinates, each marked with a Drun facility code and an estimated population figure. The Virani had known about the facilities for years. They had mapped this region of space in detail. They had simply never had a reason to say anything to anyone who would act on it. The message contained no explanation, just the coordinates and nothing else. Earth's analysts cross-referenced the list overnight. 11 of the 14 matched Drun registry entries already flagged. The other 3 were new. The fleet adjusted its route. The second message came from a species called the Thurvac Assembly, much larger, much louder, with trade agreements going back 80 years. The Drun moved nearly a third of the Assembly's export goods through their logistics network. When the Drun called in those relationships, the Thurvac mobilized a defensive perimeter fleet around the outer Drun systems and sent Earth a formal warning that any further incursion would be considered an act of hostility. Adisa read the warning aboard the Ndugu and did not change course. She had studied the Thurvac Assembly during her years as a fleet intelligence officer, methodical, careful with risk. They would protect the Drun right up to the exact point where protecting them cost more than losing them. That point hadn't been reached yet, but she knew what would reach it. The second station her team boarded was larger than the first, a full processing and housing complex in a system the Drun had listed under a long numerical code that appeared on no public navigation chart. The Virani coordinates had found it. The UEF docked before the station administrator even knew they were in system. 812 children, the final count from that station alone. The medical teams worked in shifts for 31 hours. Many of the children had spent their entire working lives there. Some had been born on the station, second generation, children of children who'd been taken before them. A few of the older ones spoke a language that was almost entirely Drun trade tongue, with only fragments of human words surviving, kept alive the same quiet, private way Soren had kept his ship's name. When the count was transmitted back to Earth, the public data networks received it at the same time as the government. The number moved through every channel with a speed that made it feel less like news and more like a physical weight dropping on everyone at once. 812. Combined with the first station, the recovered total stood at 853, and there were 12 more coordinates on the list. What the Drun Collective's legal team had failed to grasp, and what their leadership, in a closed emergency session 3 days after the second station fell, finally decided to act on, was that legal pressure had run out. Diplomatic pressure had run out. What remained in the were DS of one Drun executive whose private communication was recovered weeks later, was the only kind of pressure Earth had not yet been made to feel. The Drun did not have a military. They had never needed one. Their entire commercial model depended on staying small enough and useful enough that larger powers found it easier to protect them than replace them. What they had instead was money, and a galaxy full of species willing to take it. Within 48 hours, a contract had been quietly placed with the Kesrin Order, an armored, chitin-plated mercenary fleet operating out of the unregulated trade corridors beyond Thurvak space. Known for taking jobs nobody with a flag or a council seat would put their own name to. Earth's fleet did not know the Kesrin Order had been hired until the moment their sensors lit up red, 11 hours out from the 9th coordinate on the Virani list. A transfer depot the Drun registry listed only as Facility 11. Lieutenant Myeril Okonkwo was flying point in the lead fighter wing that day, Callsign Harrier, 3 ships ahead of the Ndugu's main formation. She saw them first on her own scope, a loose, fast-moving cluster of 6 Kesrin attack craft, hulls plated in overlapping dark segments that looked, even at this distance, less like armor than like the shell of something alive, dropping out of a debris field they'd clearly been waiting inside for hours. Her comm channel filled instantly with overlapping voices, half a dozen pilots calling contacts at once, and underneath it, the steady, unhurried voice of Admiral Adisa cutting through everything else. All wings, weapons hot, hold formation until they commit. They committed within seconds. The first Kesrin volley came in as a spread of plasma-tipped projectiles, fired not in a straight line but in a curling pattern designed to bracket a fighter no matter which way it broke. A tactic Earth's own combat doctrine had never had to plan against, because no species Earth had fought before had fought quite like this. Okonkwo rolled hard to starboard, felt the heat bloom past her canopy close enough to register on the hull sensors, and put 2 return shots into the lead Kesrin fighter's flank before it banked away into the debris field it had launched from. Aboard the Ndugu's bridge, Adisa watched the engagement unfold across a tactical display crowded with contacts, both sides too close together for any clean read. Beside her, a Virani liaison officer named Tuz assigned to the fleet weeks earlier specifically because the Virani knew this stretch of space better than anyone, called out a correction to the Ndugu's own sensor sweep, his voice carrying the flat, careful cadence of someone speaking a second language under pressure. "The debris field is not natural," he said. "It has been seeded. There are at least 4 more contacts hiding inside it that your scopes have not yet separated from the rock." Adisa didn't hesitate. "Bring us in closer. If they want cover, take the cover away from them." The Ndugu was not built for this. It had never been meant to take a hit, let alone trade fire with a mercenary cruiser, and when the lead Kesrin capital ship, a long segmented vessel the UEF tactical computer simply labeled Hostile 1, put a sustained beam across the Ndugu's forward shield, the entire bridge crew felt the deck shudder beneath them. Alarms cut through the chatter. A junior officer reported shield integrity dropping past 60%. Adisa did not move from the command chair. "Hold the line," she said. "Harrier wing, I need that capital ship's flank exposed. Twos, give me the debris field's gravitational shadow exact coordinates now." What followed was 4 minutes that several of the pilots who survived it would later describe, almost identically, as the longest 4 minutes of their lives. Okonkwo's wing broke formation deliberately, drawing 3 of the Kesrin fighters into a tight, spiraling pursuit through the debris field itself, using the same scattered rock the mercenaries had hidden inside as cover of their own, weaving between fragments too small for either side's shields to fully tolerate a direct hit at speed. One UEF fighter clipped a rock fragment and spun out, its pilot ejecting into a recovery pod seconds before the hull breached. Another took a glancing plasma hit across its wing array and kept flying anyway, smoke trailing from a ruptured coolant line, because the pilot judged correctly that turning back would matter less than finishing the run. It was Two's gravitational shadow calculation that turned the engagement. The debris field, dense as it looked, had a single narrow corridor running through its gravitational center where the rock thinned to almost nothing, a corridor the Kesrin fleet had used to stage their ambush and clearly assumed no pursuing fighter could find without the kind of mapping data only the Varani possessed. Okonkwo took the corridor at full burn, 3K. Esrin fighters committed to the chase behind her, and came out the far side directly behind Hostile One's exposed flank, just as Adisa brought the Ndugu's main batteries to bear from the opposite angle. Caught between 2 firing arcs with no clean retreat, Hostile One's captain, a Kesrin commander later identified from recovered communications only by the designation Skarn, broke off and signaled general withdrawal less than 90 seconds later. The remaining fighters scattering back into the depths of the debris field rather than risk a fight they could no longer see the shape of. The Ndugu limped into dock at facility 11 3 hours later with its forward shields down to 12%, and a hull breach in the aft cargo bay that the engineering crew patched with material scavenged from a decommissioned escape pod. Nobody aboard called it a victory in the way the news networks back on Earth eventually would. Adisa, asked by her own staff how she'd known the gambit would work, said only that she hadn't known. She'd simply trusted that a navigator who'd spent her whole life mapping the spaces other people were afraid to fly through would find something the Kesrin hadn't accounted for, because that was, in her experience, what people who'd spent their lives being underestimated tended to do. Facility 11, when the boarding team finally reached it, held 206 children. The fight that had nearly stopped them from getting there was never mentioned in the official recovery log. It didn't need to be. Every pilot who'd flown it carried it home anyway. The Drun Collective's leadership, watching the Kesrin contract collapse along with the Kesrin fleet's nerve, understood within hours that hired force had failed where legal language had already failed. What they had not yet understood was that the failed ambush had cost them something far more dangerous than the contract fee. It had told Adisa with total clarity that the collective was no longer negotiating from any position of strength at all, only stalling. She did not wait for them to find a third strategy. Nobody in the galaxy knew the old colony routes the way Earth did. For most of human history, those routes were tombstones, paths leading to places where things had gone wrong, marked in navigation databases with lost dates and last known contact records. Survey crews avoided them. Commercial shipping avoided them. There was nothing out there but the memory of failure. But the people who had mapped those routes had done it with exceptional care. Because when you are flying into uncharted space in an underfunded ship with a few hundred colonists depending on your instruments, you map everything, every gravitational anomaly, every micronebula dense enough to scatter a scan, every gap in sensor coverage where a ship could drift undetected. Earth's fleet navigators had grown up studying those maps. Some had family names on the lost records. They knew those routes the way someone knows the roads around the house they grew up in, not from charts, but from memory. When the Drun finally understood Earth wasn't going to stop, they asked the Thurvak Assembly to formally reinstate a defensive blockade around Drun Prime's orbital infrastructure. The Thurvak agreed, reluctantly. They still had trade agreements worth protecting, and calculated that a visible show of force might bring Earth to the table. Their fleet moved into position around the three main approach vectors to Drun Prime. Sensor coverage thorough enough that any incoming vessel on a standard lane would be detected and intercepted with time to spare. The UAF ships did not use the standard lanes. Adisa had given the navigation order 6 days before the Thurvak fleet ever moved, drawing on survey maps that predated the Drun's own territorial claims by 40 years. Charted by human survey crews during the first wave of expansion, mapping space nobody had needed in detail until now. 11 UEF ships slipped through a debris corridor that appeared on no Drun navigation chart, because no Drun crew had ever mapped it. Listed in the old survey database only as a hazard to be avoided, useless for commercial shipping. The crew that had charted it had done so simply out of habit. Those 11 ships reached Drun Prime's outer administrative platform before the Thurvak sensors registered anything unusual at all. By the time the first alert went out, Earth's team was already inside. The platform was not a labor facility. It was the collective's administrative core, the central records hub where every transaction, every contract, every internal document in the entire collective's history was stored. The Drun had built it to be secure against commercial espionage. It was not built to be secure against a team with no interest in stealing anything they intended to keep. Earth's forensic archivists copied everything 90 years of labor operations, downloaded into encrypted storage in under 4 hours. Then they sealed the platform, left a UEF relay in place, and navigated back out through the corridor before the Thurvak fleet had finished determining where the intrusion had even come from. The full archive was transmitted to Earth, to the Galactic Council, to public information networks, and to the legal offices of every species that had ever filed a diplomatic complaint about Earth's operation, unedited, uncurated. Everything. One document, a memo from a Drun logistics director dated 38 years earlier, discussed the acquisition opportunity presented by a colony settlement's collapse, and noted that the juvenile population represented the highest value recoverable asset from the site, since adult survivors presented resistance complications, whereas juveniles integrated into labor frameworks within 6 to 8 months with minimal behavioral management required. That memo was translated into 47 languages and released without comment. 3 major Drun trade partners suspended their contracts within 4 days. A fourth announced a full audit of shared logistics records. The collective's commercial credit rating dropped 17 points in a single trading cycle, the largest single-cycle drop ever recorded for a registered commercial entity. The Orani Federation's senior trade minister resigned the following day, citing personal reasons. The Thurvak Assembly sent a quiet, unofficial message to Adisa's flagship. Their fleet was being recalled for resupply and would not be redeployed to Drun space during the current operation. Adisa forwarded it to Magnuson without comment. He understood what it meant. The Drun Collective's leadership, watching their administrative core sit in Earth's custody and their commercial future dissolve in real time, made a decision their own legal team had been advising against for 2 weeks. They asked for a formal meeting. Not a negotiation, they had stopped using that word. They asked for terms. Adisa did not attend. She sent a junior diplomatic officer with a single document, a full list of every child still unaccounted for across all known Drun facilities, and a single instruction: return them all, provide complete records of any sold or transferred to third parties, and surrender the collective's leadership to an Earth-convened tribunal. When the Drun's lead delegate asked what Earth was prepared to offer in return, the junior officer answered in the tone someone might use to explain an obvious thing to someone who should already understand it. "We'll stop," she said. The final coordinate on the list was not a station. It was a planet, cold, low atmosphere at the edge of the collective's registered territory, listed in the commercial registry as an agricultural processing site. The UEF found it buried in the archive, flagged not by the forensic team but by a child welfare analyst on Earth who noticed that the facility's documented food output was far too high for its registered equipment, unless the labor force was significantly larger than recorded. The analyst was 19 years old. She had been working volunteer shifts at the Recovery Coordination Center since the operation began. Her name was Peta. She sent her finding up the chain with a short note. She might be wrong, but thought someone should check. She wasn't wrong. The planet held 631 children, many of them there for years. The settlement had developed its own structure by that point, older children teaching younger ones, quiet systems of mutual care, a whole interior life the Drun administrators had never noticed, because they'd only ever been looking at output numbers. When the UAF medical teams landed, the children didn't scatter or hide. They waited. The oldest among them had organized the younger ones into groups before the ships even touched down, because word had reached them through the facility's limited information systems that something was happening, and they wanted to be ready. A 15-year-old girl named Amma, on the planet since she was 4, spoke primarily Drun trade tongue, but could still write her family's language from a scrap of printed text she'd found in a cargo container years earlier and taught herself from. She served as the informal translator between the children and the first medical team on the ground, efficiently without being asked because someone needed to, and she was the one who could. The medical team's lead, Dr. Ferris, said afterward that in 40 years of field medicine he had never seen anything like it. Children left to survive on their own terms, who had done it with a thoroughness and a quiet dignity that made the scale of what had been done to them even more impossible to look at directly. The final count across all 11 systems and 14 facilities came to just under 4,000 children recovered. Another 12 were traced through the collective's third-party transfer records to facilities OP. Rated by other species entirely. Each case was handed to the Galactic Council's newly formed investigative body with a complete evidence package and a formal request for immediate action. Earth did not ask twice. It submitted the request, then waited exactly 9 days before following up publicly. The tribunal convened on a neutral station, broadcast live to 32 species public information networks. Hall, the station master arrested at Procurement Hub 17, sat at the defendant's table alongside 6 members of the Drun Collective's senior leadership. Earth's legal team presented the case from the recovered archive, not their own interpretation of it, just the documents themselves, read into the record in order. The Drun's defense counsel argued procedural grounds for 11 days. Then they stopped because there were no more procedural grounds left to argue. The Interstellar Child Protection Mandate was drafted over the following 8 months by a working group of 22 species. It established, for the first time, a universal legal definition of protected personhood that could not be overridden by commercial classification codes. It required all member species to audit their existing labor registries against a shared biological identity database. It gave Earth a permanent enforcement seat on the new oversight body. 31 species signed it on the first day. The repatriation process was not clean, it was not fast. Some of the children had spent their entire lives in Drun facilities and were now teenagers with no memory of Earth who had built fragmented, difficult, but real lives in the places they'd been held. Earth did not insist. It offered ships, resources, connection. Some came immediately, some came years later. Amma went to Earth for 2 years, then chose to work with the new oversight body as a field advocate, because she had decided that someone who understood both sides of that experience should be doing that work, and she was the one who could. Soren, the 9-year-old boy who had kept his colony ship's name alive through years of work shifts, was reunited with a grade tant on Earth who had spent 30 years filing inquiry requests about the lost vessel. They had never met. They sat together for a long time without saying much, and that was enough. Admiral Adisa received a message she had not been expecting on a quiet evening 2 months after the tribunal concluded. It came from the Colonial Registry team, a routine notification generated by the Archive Cross-Reference Program. Her own family name had appeared in a third-party transfer record from 40 years earlier. A child. A different system than any the UEF had yet cleared. She read the message 3 times. Then she forwarded it to the investigative body with a personal note attached. She did not write much. She was not a person who used many words when fewer would do. She just wrote that she would like someone to check, and that she thought it was worth looking. She had learned something in the past months about the value of looking.